The first time I walked into a dairy farm outside Mount Hope, in Holmes County, Ohio, in the middle of August, I expected noise. I expected a compressor somewhere behind the wall, a fan pushing hard, ductwork humming over my head, and that dry metallic smell every air-conditioned building seems to wear by noon. What I found instead took something from me. It took certainty. The room was dim and stone-lined. It sat half below grade, under the shaded side of the house, with jars on one wall and crocks on another. The air touched my arms before I understood it. Cool, dense, still, not refrigerated. Earth-cooled. I could smell wet limestone, apples, and old wood. Outside, the gravel flashed white in the heat. Inside, nothing moved. I stood there for 11 minutes looking for the expected thing. It wasn't there. No condenser, no thermostat, no register rattling loose in the floor. Just a pipe disappearing into the bank behind the building and a quiet that felt almost confrontational. And that's when I understood I'd been wrong about everything. The realization did not arrive as a theory. It arrived as a physical fact. If the ground below your feet sits near 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit for most of the year, then a house that learns how to borrow that temperature is playing an entirely different game, not better insulation alone, not a stronger machine, a different game. I've been going back to Holmes County every summer for 3 years, and every time, I find something the building industry forgot on purpose. What I am going to show you is simple enough to sound fake. A buried air run, built for $286 to $412 in common materials, can deliver intake air in the 54 to 56 degree range, before your conventional system does a second of work. And yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago. Stay with me, because what I found in Holmes County uses the same physics the Persians used to make desert air livable 3,300 years ago. The science is not mysterious, it is embarrassingly plain. A few feet below the frost line, soil temperature stops behaving like afternoon weather and starts behaving like stored memory. The Pennsylvania Agricultural History Project notes that rural Pennsylvania root cellars use the constant temperature below frost level, around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, to preserve food long before refrigeration arrived. Natural Resources Canada says an earth-to-air thermal exchanger works best when the tube sits at least 1.5 meters below grade, with meaningful performance from roughly 30 to 40 meters of length. Think about your car radiator, then reverse the direction. In a radiator, hot fluid gives up heat to passing air. Here, hot summer air gives up heat to cooler soil through the wall of the pipe. The ground becomes the heat sink. The tube becomes the exchanger. Your house borrows the planet's thermal mass instead of fighting the sky, and the performance gap is real. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection says ground-coupled systems commonly deliver a coefficient of performance of 3 to 6 units of heating or cooling for every 1 unit of electrical input. Air source heat pumps often sit at 1.75 to 2.5 under tougher conditions. The tube itself can do even more shocking work because the earth provides the temperature difference before a compressor starts. On a bad summer afternoon, you are not manufacturing cool air from scratch. You are pre-buying it from the ground. Natural Resources Canada gives the design numbers most installers never show you. Less than 10 meters of pipe is usually pointless. Around 30 to 40 meters is where the exchange starts becoming serious. Around 80 meters is often the practical ceiling before pressure losses become annoying. The same guide points to the Biohouse Environmental Learning Center in Minnesota. There, an earth-to-air system meets the building's full summer cooling load. It even tempers winter air from minus 29 degrees Celsius to minus 4 before it reaches the occupied space. That is not folklore. That is engineering. And the academic literature backs the field results. A 2020 paper in the National Center for Biotechnology Information modeled buried horizontal ducts at 2.5 meters deep. It found capacity reductions reaching 65% in Ottawa with 100-meter runs. Read that again. 65%. Not because the machine became magical, because the load got intercepted before it entered the building. Nobody told you. Not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you tonnage. That knowledge never disappeared. It was written out of the manual. It was waiting. That gap represents a massive market in equipment, refrigerant, service, and replacement every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. The living proof is not in a laboratory first. It is in Holmes County, Ohio, near Mount Hope and Berlin, where I kept walking into buildings that sounded wrong for summer. Wrong because they were too quiet. I remember stepping from full sun into a spring house and feeling my shoulders drop before my eyes adjusted. No blower started. No vent kicked on. I heard one fly, one distant buggy wheel, and water moving behind stone. An Amish farmer named Eli stood with me beside the shelves and tapped the wall with his knuckles. He told me, plain as weather, that his people had been building with the bank, the cellar, and the shaded air path for 4 generations. Then he pointed toward the hill and said his grandfather used the same slope before power lines reached that road. It never changed. I asked him what he watched first when summer came hard. He did not say the thermometer. He said the morning air, the shade line, and whether the night had given the stone enough time to recover. Then he laughed at the way I kept looking for machinery and said a machine teaches you to ask what it needs. A cellar teaches you to ask what the hill is already giving. That sentence stayed with me. By the time I had gone back in late September and then again in February, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The technique was not one object. It was orientation, depth, masonry, shade, and air path acting together. One season rolled into the next without a service call. No truck. No refrigerant gauge. No outside unit icing up or screaming into the dark. Just attention. That knowledge came here through families shaped by the Palatinate, Alsace, and Canton Bern, then carried onward into Pennsylvania and Ohio. The Penn State Amish history timeline places major Amish migration in earnest in 1737. Holmes County history records Amish settlement in the area from the early 1800s. The old storage logic shows up again in James H. Beatty's 1917 United States Department of Agriculture Farmers Bulletin, number 879, Home Storage of Vegetables. It was waiting. Go back far enough and the arrogance falls apart. In ancient Egypt, paintings dated to around 1300 BC show early wind-catching structures guiding moving air into buildings. In Persian Yazd, engineers later refined that idea with badgers and qanats, sometimes drawing air across subterranean water and through towers that still define the skyline. The Dowlatabad Garden Windcatcher rises 33 meters. That is not decoration. That is climate control. Rome arrived at the same truth from another angle. Experimental archaeology at Carnuntum found hypocaust floors reaching roughly 20 to 50 degrees Celsius. Because the Romans understood thermal mass, airflow, and how slowly masonry gives back what it stores. In Korea, Ondol heating pushed warmth beneath thick floors through stone channels, turning the building itself into a battery. Different climates, different materials, same attention. The Persians didn't read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. Every civilization that mastered extreme conditions arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from the Palatinate to Pennsylvania 289 years ago, and kept building it because it worked, and because they never needed anyone's permission to do what made sense. Here is where the anger starts. In January 1956, Carrier won its largest residential air conditioning contract to that date, supplying 702 Weathermaker central systems for Levittown, Pennsylvania, with Levitt & Sons. That decision mattered. It turned post-war comfort into a subdivision template. A ground-cooled house threatened far more than one machine sale. It threatened the replacement cycle, the service contract, and the monthly power load attached to every new roof. The burial of this knowledge did not happen with one dramatic ban. It happened in manuals, standards, defaults, and omissions. Mechanical cooling became the assumed answer, then the financed answer, then the code-shaped answer. By the time buried air paths reappeared in green building circles, they were being judged against badly installed examples. Natural Resources Canada's design guide makes the issue brutally clear. Smooth pipe, sealed joints, and a minimum 2% slope for condensate are essential. Slotted pipe should be avoided where radon is present. Miss those details once, and the failure gets blamed on the whole idea forever. That is how you suppress something in America. You do not always outlaw it. You make the bad version visible and the good version invisible. You build trade culture around the failure case. Then you teach the next generation that the failure case is the only case that ever existed. One moldy, flat-laid, unsealed tube becomes the cautionary tale. 10,000 compressors become common sense. The Allies were predictable. Industry had carrier and the wider HVAC trade. Government had the mortgage and code culture that standardized mechanically conditioned suburbia after the war. Media sold the dream. Look through mid-century shelter magazines and you see the same script repeated. Modern life equals sealed comfort, purchased comfort, powered comfort. Ads and editorial vision move together because ad money and product adoption move together. The timeline makes the drift obvious. The Energy Department notes that Carrier introduced the first home air conditioner in May 1926. By 1947, 43,000 room units had already been sold in the United States. By the late 1960s, most new homes were going up with central air. Once that much capital had factories, distributors, installers, and utility demand behind it, a passive alternative stopped looking like a technique. It started looking like a threat. And once the suburbs standardized around that machinery, the educational culture followed. Trade schools taught sizing charts, not soil temperatures. Sales brochures taught SEER ratings, not banked masonry. Contractors learned load calculations, then forgot load avoidance. That knowledge never disappeared. It was filed away. It was waiting. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from architecture schools, building codes, and contractor habits. Not because it failed, because it wasn't profitable, and the pattern never stopped. On March 3, 2021, the International Code Council Board voted to eliminate the final governmental member consensus vote for future versions of the International Energy Conservation Code. NEP recorded that decision. It noted the Code Board shifted future updates into an ANSI committee process after unusually strong efficiency gains had survived open voting. Architectural Record reported that builders and natural gas utilities had objected after electric-ready and efficiency provisions advanced in the 2021 code. The American Gas Association has openly fought building code upgrades and electrification campaigns. Same mechanism, same motive. Slow the alternatives. Protect the installed base. If you think that has nothing to do with a buried cooling tube, look again. Anything that reduces peak load, shrinks equipment size, or lets you delay a replacement purchase attacks the same revenue stream. That is why simple ideas get called fringe, while expensive ideas get called standard. Not because they work better, because they invoice better. And the money trail is not subtle. Open Secrets lists the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute at $1,223,576 in federal lobbying expenditures for 2024 alone. The number matters less than the principle. Industries do not spend that kind of money to encourage you to need less of what they sell. They spend it to shape standards, timelines, incentives, and expectations. Quietly. The heating and air conditioning contractors market in America is worth $159.4 billion a year, according to IBISWorld's 2026 estimate. Every alternative installed is equipment and service that never gets sold. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with land, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to tear up your foundation. You need a yard and a weekend. If your lot gives you even a narrow side yard, you can build a small open-loop earth tube. It can feed a basement, mudroom, pantry, or return air plenum without touching the rest of the house first. I would start with one smooth wall 4-inch Schedule 40 PVC run, or SDR 35 sewer pipe if your soil is stable, at 36 to 60 feet long. Put the top of that pipe 72 to 84 inches below grade if you can. Natural Resources Canada recommends at least 1.5 meters of depth. Performance barely improves after 3.5 meters, so do not chase depth for ego. If you have more room, 2 parallel lines beat one oversized gamble. 2 4-inch lines spaced 24 inches apart are easier to source, easier to clean, and often cheaper than one specialty duct. If your yard is tight, even a 32-foot run can still pre-cool air enough to matter. In a pantry, basement office, or sleeping room, start small, measure. Then decide if the second trench is worth it. Give the pipe a steady 2% slope from intake to drain point. That means roughly a 1-inch drop every 4 feet. Add a screened intake hood 18 to 24 inches above grade on the shaded side of the yard. Then finish the far end with a sealed cleanout and condensate trap. Use solvent-welded joints. Use smooth interior wall. Use closed-cell pipe insulation only where the line rises into the building. Simple matters. Your intake matters more than most people realize. Keep it at least 10 feet from a driveway, a dryer vent, or a trash area. Face it north or east if your lot allows. Give it a simple metal hood, stainless insect mesh, and a removable MERV 8 or MERV 11 filter box. Inside the house where you can actually reach it. Accessibility is part of performance. If you cannot inspect it, you will not maintain it. A flat trench 18 inches wide is enough for one line. Bed the pipe in 2 to 3 inches of washed gravel or coarse sand, not rubble. Then backfill carefully so you do not crack a joint. A 6-inch inspection tee near the house is worth every dollar. A small inline duct fan in the 24 to 50 watt range will move 40 to 80 cubic feet per minute. Enough for a trial zone of 120 to 260 square feet. More is not smarter. Bring the line into the building above the slab if you can, not through the lowest, wettest point. Tie it first into a dedicated register box, a simple wall grill, or the return side of an existing ERV or HRV. Do not dump raw outdoor air blindly into a closed house. Control the path. If you already own a dehumidifier, place it in the same zone for the first summer and log the results. A $12 thermometer and humidity meter will tell you more truth than 1,000 opinions online. The materials are ordinary. Pipe sections run $7 to $14 each if you catch local pricing right. A screened hood costs $18 to $34. A condensate trap and cleanout parts cost $22 to $41. A 24-watt to 50-watt inline fan costs $39 to $86. Gravel, primer, cement, silicone, insect screen, and one radon test kit usually land another $44 to $91. Your total comes in around $286 to $412 if you dig yourself or combine the trench with another yard project. The labor is human-sized. One Saturday morning for layout and marking. One day for trenching if your soil cooperates or a mini excavator is already on site. Another half day for solvent welding, bedding, and backfill. One quiet evening for the fan, filter box, and test instruments. That is the scale. Not a 6-month remodel. Not a financing package. A weekend. And this is where most people overcomplicate it. You are not trying to cool the whole house on day one. You are trying to create one protected zone that stays usable when the grid is stressed and the sun is angry. A bedroom, a pantry, a workroom, a basement den. Once you feel the result, the rest of the math gets easier. Slope is not optional. Flat pipe causes standing condensate. Corrugated drain tile causes dust pockets, biofilm, and cleaning problems. Do not substitute it. HDPE or PVC with a smooth interior is the right move. Type matters, joint quality matters, radon testing matters, seal every joint, test for radon after installation. Once a year, open the cleanout, inspect for moisture, and flush if needed. That is the maintenance. If you want one more layer of insurance, lime wash the receiving room walls. Or keep a bag of hydrated lime nearby for seasonal moisture control. Old storage rooms use Type S hydrated lime for a reason. It buffers surface moisture and helps keep musty corners honest. Pair that with muslin cotton covers over stored produce, or low-E radiant foil on the west window of the room. And the cooling effect compounds instead of fighting itself. On a 95-degree day, with shaded intake air and decent soil contact. This kind of run can deliver air in the upper 60s to low 70s. Before it ever reaches a fan coil or room register. In shoulder seasons, it may be enough by itself for the protected zone. In a humid stretch, it reduces the burden before your conventional system turns on. The result is less runtime, less cycling, and a room that feels calm instead of punished. Read the numbers from the other direction, and the insult becomes obvious. A 50-watt fan running 8 hours uses 0.4 kilowatt hours. A 3,500-watt central compressor running that same window uses 28 kilowatt hours. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between using physics and renting it back from a machine. Before you bury anything, borrow one habit from every old farmer who ever trusted a cellar. Measure first. Take the temperature in your yard at dawn, at noon, and after sunset for 3 straight days. Check the basement wall. Check the shaded north side. Check the soil moisture after rain. Then match the tube to the place instead of forcing the place to flatter the tube. The Amish do not start with hardware. They start with the site. They watch where frost leaves last, where runoff settles, where shade arrives earliest, and where the ground smells clean when opened. That is how bad installations get avoided before they become cautionary tales. Pay attention first, then dig. Your shovel should confirm what your thermometer already told you, not argue with it. That part saves money later, not because it failed, because the earth never changes fast enough to care about your afternoon. Your central air costs $70,200 to $14,800 to install. It costs $96 to $248 per month to run, and lasts 12 to 18 years before it ends up in a landfill. This costs $412 total. It lasts 24 to 50 years. Your choice. The math is not subtle. Everything I've covered across this channel: root cellar humidity control, lime wash for storage walls, rainwater pressure without pumps. I've put it all in one place, step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. It does not have a public name yet. Link is in the description. But stay here, because what Eli built into that hillside is the part nobody is talking about yet. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, not for me, for what comes next, because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, your hottest July electric bill, and whether your grandparents ever used a cellar, bank barn, or spring house. In the comments, I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you what a 1946 Penn State document reveals about keeping a food room cold without electricity in peak humidity. The technique uses nothing but lime, wood, and moving air. And the report from 1946 proves extension agents knew about it decades before contractors stopped mentioning it. You're not going to want to miss that one.